This is a Momentum Media production.
Nerd alert! Property Nerds, the home for data-driven property investors, where we uncover Australia's hot and cold markets, latest headlines and trends.
Good day, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Property Nerds podcast. I'm Jung, the Senior Research Analyst at InvestorKit Buyers Agency. I work closely with Arjun in the research division, and I guess I can call myself another property nerd in the team. And today I'm covering for Arjun to be your host. As he mentioned in the last episode, he had a heart surgery last week and is still in the hospital recovering. Good news is this surgery was really successful. And as far as I know, Arjun is doing really well. Actually, he's already working from time to time. So let's look forward to the grand comeback of Arjun 2.0 in a few months. Now let's get back to the show. Today, we have a really special guest, Dr. Sunny Nguyen. Sunny is an Asia-Pacific Assistant Director at Moody's Analytics, based in Sydney. Her expertise lies in applied econometrics with a special interest in leveraging micro data and data science techniques to answer macroeconomic questions. Sunny holds a master's degree from the University of British Columbia and a PhD from the University of Sydney. And that's not all. Before joining Moody's, Sunny was actually a lead analyst / economist at the Reserve Bank of Australia, working across economic research, economic analysis, and financial stability departments. And what's more amazing about her is that she's also teaching. She's currently a lecturer at the University of Sydney, teaching undergraduate and graduate courses on macroeconomic theory and financial economics. How amazing is that? So I am currently studying in the University of Sydney, so that's how I met Sunny. I really enjoyed her classes last semester, and today I'm really excited to have her on our podcast. So hi, Sunny. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Chung. Very, very nice to be here. And thank you for having me. And thanks so much for the very kind introduction to me. That's very kind of you.
No, that pleasure is all mine. I'm so happy to have you here. So I know that you just started your job in Moody's. Do you mind? I'll just congratulate you again, kind of in person, because last time it was on LinkedIn. So congratulations on a new job.
Thank you, John. It was very exciting. It's a very a different direction that I'm taking in my career. I've been with the RBA for 6 years now. So it's been a very long journey, and I cannot be more thankful for the time, the experience and the very beautiful relationships that I, accumulated over time, at the bank, the friends and the colleagues and all of the knowledge and experience I have gained there. But I thought it was about time to embark on a new journey and to start, doing different things. And the job at Moody's just came at the right time, right place, right time, whereby I was looking for something that has sort of like an international flavor to it. So I've been only focusing on the Australian economy, for the past 6 years. And at Moody's, I will be covering many other countries in the Asia Pacific region. The job, will sort of like have multiple aspects to it. We have economic analysis, we have economic research, and we also have a lot of like client-facing aspects, because Moody's Analytics, is all about providing solutions, using economic insights to our clients from a diverse, range of backgrounds and needs. And so that's going to be very exciting. The job is going to be in some ways similar, but also very, very different. So I mentioned to you, I started the role 2 weeks ago. So the past 2 weeks has been all about keeping up, and learning new things, learning about the new processes and how things are done at Moody's, getting to know people, cultivating relationships with stakeholders and so on and so forth. So it will be sort of like a learning curve for sure.
Yes.
But hopefully, very soon I will be able to start producing. At the moment, I'm a consumer of information, of outcomes, of output. So hopefully very soon I will be able to be at the production side of things. I will be starting to produce stuff. So so very excited. Looking forward to,
Yeah, it does sound very exciting. And I can tell you, the way you talk is really economic. You're using so many economic terms.
And that is no hazard, John. I cannot help myself. Please do tell me if, I start, using too much economic jargons, and it's getting harder for the audience to understand or something but I'll try my best, to make, my answers as accessible as possible. Just like, I do in class, right? So when I was in class with people, I tried my best to give real world examples and
so today we're gonna, I guess we are not particularly interested in the Moody side yet. we may have you on the show again talking about your new research projects at Moody's. But today we are more interested in your previous research in the RBA. I understand that you did a lot of very interesting research projects in the past 6 years, including, I guess, consumer confidence, household debt, corporate debt, and recently a research on GPT. They are all very interesting. But today, I guess we are particularly interested in talking about one thing, which is the New Sentiment Index. How does it sound?
It sounds fantastic. Thanks for inviting me to talk about the New Sentiment Index again. It was the paper itself was released a couple of years ago at the height of the pandemic. So it sort of gained a lot of traction back then because of the relevancy, to the economic
conditions
back then.
I can tell.
Thank you, and thank you so much for letting me talk about it again now.
No, it's our pleasure. I'm pretty sure our audience would be very interested in this as well. You were talking about COVID. I was about to ask you what's the background of that research. Was it related to COVID or it's just coincidence?
It's a very happy coincidence. I don't know if I can call it happy because, the pandemic itself, it was unfortunate. But, selfishly speaking, the research was underway. And the pandemic happened, and we couldn't have got a better user case, to demonstrate the usefulness of and the power of the research of the index. So it was happy, unfortunate incident.
Sounds good. Right. COVID treats you really well in this way.
Having said that, even though it was very typical during the pandemic and again a lot of traction there, I think the topic itself is a timeless one, and it will have it will have a value added to our understanding of the economy regardless of where we are in the business cycles. And so I guess we'll talk more about that later on during the podcast. But it's something that we started thinking about way before the pandemic. And in fact, it is a topic of research that the literature, the many economists, in the literature have invested in and trying to answer for years now. So it's not something, just
because of
a spur of a moment, if you will.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So that's the background of that research. And now let's get into it. Can you tell me what is News Sentiment Index?
All right. So let me try to give it a very, brief answer. In a nutshell, the News Sentiment Index is a metric designed to quantify the sentiment expressed in news articles related to the economy. Now, by analyzing the balance of positive and negative words used in the news articles. The news sentiment index is going to provide a real-time indicator of the public sentiment. That will help in understanding how the news influences economic perceptions and behaviors, but it also offers valuable insights into economic conditions and economic trends. So that's in a nutshell what the news sentiment index is about.
Yes, that's very thorough. I can tell you've talked about it many
times.
So you've mentioned in that overall summary that you're measuring the balance between positive and negative words in news articles. And now can we discuss this part in more detail, how you exactly measure the positive and negative words?
Yeah, for sure. So as I mentioned earlier, our approach is going to be text-based. Essentially, what we do is we measure the sentiment of a set of text from the news articles. That is whether the net balance of words used by journalists are positive or negative. So when a journalist uses more positive words or fewer negative words, then that is an indicator that sentiment is rising in the economy. Now, how exactly do we go about measuring that? First of all, what we do is we sort news articles by date of publication, and then the data are divided into blocks of time, which could be a day, for example. That's the beauty of the index because it can be as frequently updated as daily.
Yes.
And so for each time period, what we do next is we compute the news sentiment index by subtracting the count of negative words from the count of positive words, and then dividing by the total word count. So that will give us the news sentiment index. I'm not sure if I have mentioned that earlier when we talked, but we also have another index that is the news uncertainty index, which is basically the way we measure how uncertain the public are about the economy at any given point in time. And that was particularly prevalent during the COVID-19 pandemic, where we observed uncertainty about the economy rising up very significantly. But the way we measure our news uncertainty index, John, is a little bit different from how we calculate the news sentiment index. In that what we do is we calculate the share of articles that express uncertainty through keywords such as, risk, uncertainty, uncertain, volatility, unpredictability, etc., rather than using the share of words that express uncertainty within the article. So we use the share of articles instead. And John, the reason why we have to do that is because of the limited number of times that words expressing uncertainty appear in the news articles. So if we use the count of words within the text as an indicator, we will have a disproportionately small share of uncertainty being expressed.
Right. How do we determine if a word is positive or negative? Is there, a criteria for that?
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually. It's a very important question. I think it's worth noting now that we take a dictionary-based approach to constructing our index. In other words, to be thinking about how a word can be positive or negative. That is essentially what we do is we compare words within the text against existing dictionaries of keywords that are deemed to express positivity, negativity, and uncertainty. And so for our purpose, we choose to go with the Lachlan-McDonald Dictionary, which is a dictionary designed specifically for the domain of economics and finance. And so the words used in that dictionary will be expressing, as I said, positivity, negativity, and uncertainty relevant to the domain of economics and finance, so that we remove, keywords that are basically just like, daily conversation that may not be relevant to the economy and not necessarily expressing, economic sentiment. And so what we do is we use that dictionary as a base. We compare the keywords in the text with words in that dictionary. So if we see a match, then we give the positive account
or negative
account, Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So that dictionary is called Lauren MacDonald dictionary.
Yeah.
Right. So I guess it is publicly accessible.
It is publicly available. You can download it from their website. Yeah.
Nice. I guess I was just asking because perhaps our audience would like to check and do a small research by themselves.
For sure. That sounds fantastic. That sounds very fantastic.
Yes.
And also, if I'm not mistaken, if you go to the RBA website and you go to our research paper, in the supplementary document section of the RDP, you will be able to download the dictionary. As well. So we have a lot of publicly available data supplementing the research paper published on our website. Yeah.
Nice. That sounds so good. So regarding the methodology, I actually have another question for you. When you clicked news articles, how do you click them? Do you just Google, or there's any database for news articles?
Yeah, for sure. So we actually source daily news articles from Dow Jones Factiva, which is a comprehensive database that aggregates content from a wide array of global news sources. So Dow Jones Factiva is the database that we use. Now, each article in the database includes metadata, such as publication time, the language, the region, and the category of the news of the article. And so we clean the data up by removing duplicates. And then we select only articles that are written in English by Australian media outlets to cover the Australian economy. And so that will include articles written by the Australian, the Sydney Morning Herald, and the Australian Financial Review, etc., to name a few. So those are the key media outlets that basically generate the database that we use for our analysis.
Right. And just out of curiosity, I'm pretty sure as uni students, I can access that for free through the uni library. But for the public, is it free? I guess publicly accessible and freely accessible to the public, or not really?
My understanding is access to Factiva typically requires a subscription, which is often provided through, as you said, your Sydney University, which is, an educational institution. It can be accessed through a library or a large organization such as, the FBI. That's how we got access to the data.
I see.
So yes, so it is true that, having, the access to a comprehensive news database would require subscription. So for the general public, that may not be, immediately accessible. What I believe to be true is, potentially you can try to get access via your local state library, local. I think if you have sort of like strata, or like city council library, that they may be able to help you get access to news as well. Obviously, you can also Google, right? So, I mean, the news, except for subscribed news, in the sense that, like if, a media that has specific subscription-based business model, then you may not be able to access them by just Googling. But if it is, like a free, to read media outlet, then, like by just like Googling, you will be able to at least,
you can still use that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes, totally. Cool. Yeah, that's quite useful information. So now I guess I've understood the methodology better than before. Now let's move on to the findings. So first thing, yeah, how's your findings like in regards to the relationship between news sentiment index and economic activities?
So when we first think about the link between news sentiment and the economy, there are two directions it can go, right? So on one hand, news sentiment can impact the economy by affecting consumer and business confidence. And to the extent that the public rely on the media to infer about the economy, positive news can boost confidence, leading to increased spending and investment, while negative news can dampen sentiment and reducing and therefore reducing economic activity. So that's one side of the coin. Now, on the other hand, news sentiment reflects the current condition of the economy, right? Because the media will be reporting about what's going on in the economy. And so the positive and negative cycles in the news will move in tandem with the business cycles. So which direction is actually taking place or which one is dominating is actually a topic of much research and debate. And but what we have to do first is to establish whether news sentiment and economic condition actually co-move together, right? Whether or not there is a correlation between news sentiment and economic conditions. And our news sentiment index is shown to clearly move with fluctuations in the Australian economy. And it was able to capture all of the key events, key economic events, such as the 1990s recession, the global financial crisis in 2008 to 2010, and the recent pandemic-led contraction in 2020. And so it was able to capture all of these, fluctuations, and it can be constructed on a very frequent basis, which is essentially can be constructed daily. It can also potentially identify the turning point in economic activity. So when we move from one side of the business cycle to another, the news sentiment will be able to identify the turning points before the other indicators become available. So we have survey-based, measures of consumer sentiment, of business conditions and stuff like that. But they are not as frequent as, the news sentiment because they cannot be, conducted on a daily basis. And so the high frequency nature of the news sentiment is very important from a policy perspective, but also from an investor's perspective, because if you can, capture changes and movements in the business cycles as early as possible, then that is very essential for decision making.
You can respond more. Right. So basically, the economy influences news sentiment. When the economy is not doing well, the sentiments will be going down. But in return, the news sentiment also influences the economy activities in terms of consumption, I guess business spendings and other things.
So actually, to that point, John, it is very good that you bring it up because it is actually another finding, of the paper that is besides the fact that we find the sentiment index and the uncertainty index to be co-moving with fluctuations in the economy. We also find evidence suggesting that changes in the news sentiment drive survey-based measures of sentiment and economic activity. So we actually find that changes in news-based sentiment and uncertainty precede movements in survey-based sentiment measures, such as the consumer sentiment index. Now, that could be because, as we've been talking about here, because consumers rely on high-frequency information that is broadcast through the news media, they change their behavior. they change their confidence and therefore their consumption patterns and stuff like that. So that speaks to our hypothesis that the news actually affects consumers and business confidence. So that is a very, very important finding. And relatedly, we also find that the News Sentiment Index predicts changes in business conditions. And that is even after controlling for the survey-based measures of business conditions. So what it means is that the index carries meaningful information about the economy that the other indicators, such as the survey-based index, cannot fully capture. So that is something that we find particularly exciting, because it means that not only they move together, the news sentiment actually move ahead, and potentially they lead to changes in the survey-based measures.
Just in case our audience is not so clear about the survey-based measures, by survey-based measures, we're talking about the Westpac, Melbourne Institute, a consumer sentiment index, and the NZ what's that called? Roy Morgan? NZ Roy Morgan.
Exactly.
Right. Why do you think it's the case that the survey-based ones don't cover the information that news sentiment covers?
So what I mean is, first of all, there are two things happening here. The first one is in terms of the frequency of the survey, surveys versus, the news being collected. So the news data are collected on a daily basis, whereby the surveys are usually conducted
fortnightly,
my understanding, fortnightly, monthly, at best weekly. So it is not gonna be as as updated as the daily news sentiment. So that's the first thing in terms of the frequency. And the second thing is that the news will potentially capture everything that is going on in the economy, including things that consumers themselves may not be paying close attention to. So as a consumer, maybe you pay more attention to what's going on with prices, with inflation, maybe to some extent housing prices, what's going on with interest rates, things like that. But you may not be paying close attention to geopolitical tension, labor market, progress. If you're already employed, you may not be worried too much about what's going on in the labor market. So aspects of the economy may not be fully captured if you just ask a consumer what they think about the economy.
Cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So basically, the survey-based indexes, they can be somehow subjective, or they may not be as thorough as the news sentiment index. So wow, this is very powerful. Very powerful indeed.
So I have to be extremely careful here, not to downplay the role of the consumer sentiment index, the business condition index. Those are wonderful and very, very useful and important surveys that we have to keep monitoring. So kudos to the Westpac and Melbourne Institute and the ANZ Roy Morgan for conducting these very important surveys. And for continuing to do so. I'm just saying that the news sentiment index and the news uncertainty index will be very useful addition to the suite of indicators that we already have to monitor the economy. So they should be used in conjunction together instead of choosing one over the other.
So in that research, actually, you were also studying the relation or the interaction between the index, the news sentiment index, with monetary policy. Can you explain more on that as well?
Yeah, for sure. So in order to answer that question, John, we need to first ask ourselves why this is important for a central bank. right? So, for example, if the RBA wants to cut interest rates and lift confidence and economic activity, then it needs to know how its policy actions are reported in the news media and how that might potentially affect beliefs amongst consumers about the outlook for the economy. And so motivated by that potential link, what we do is we develop a multi-policy news sentiment index for articles that mention terms specifically related to multi-policy, such as multi-policy itself, cash rates, and the RBA. So terms related to, these important factors of the multi-policy making process. And what we find particularly interesting is that the index is significantly correlated with the stance of monetary policy, which is measured by the monetary policy shocks. Now, what do monetary policy shocks actually mean?
Yeah.
We can think of them simply as changes in the cash rate that are not systematically related to changes in the RBA's forecast for economic activity and inflation. So every time we want to set monetary policy, we use our forecast, right? So the RBA will do some forecast for economic activity, some forecast for inflation, and then we think about what do we do about our policy, our monetary policy, having had our forecast. Now, using those forecasts, we believe the monetary policy stance should be in certain way.
Right.
But in reality, monetary policy decisions may deviate from what we think based on the forecast. And so to the extent that leftover, that residual is completely random, then nothing should be correlated to it. But what we find interesting is that the news sentiment index actually correlates with the shock measures. With whatever is left over from that.
That is interesting.
Yeah, and so that correlation itself suggests that in setting monetary policy, the RBA takes into account additional information about the future direction of the economy, which is not reflected, which is not fully captured by the RBA's forecast or by the financial market forecast of the economy. But that is present in the news articles. So the extra information that the RBA takes into account when making monetary policy is also present in the news.
So am I understanding it right that the news, that I guess the positivity or negativity expressed in the news
that might be taken into account in the RBA's assessments of the risk around the forecast. So when we set our forecast, we'll also be thinking about what are the risks to our forecast. So our forecast could be too low, could be too high, and basically, when we say the risk to the forecast, it means that, there's some extra information about the economy that the forecast cannot capture. But that may be in our assessment of risk. And so that is also in the news. So when we say that, our decision, the leftover from our decision relative to our forecast correlate with the news sentiment index, it means that the news contains useful information about the risk to the economic outlook which the RBA is responding when they set interest rates.
Got it. So both the news and I guess I can't say this, but news capture the risks RBA is considering when they make the decision.
Exactly.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm feeling
it is
like
a very nuanced point to make. It is really hard to express, in a very concise and clear manner. Yeah, it's a complicated matter. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, good to understand. I'm feeling like I'm in the class now.
I hope I'm a good teacher.
You are definitely a great teacher.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for explaining that. That was perfect. Now I guess it's finally the time that we talk about news sentiment with, I guess, the relationship between news sentiment and the housing market. I believe you developed a housing news sentiment index specifically for the housing market. And how is it? Can you tell me more about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the coolest things about the New Sentiment Index is that it can be constructed for specific sectors and specific regions. Because it is text-based, so as long as the text, reviews information about, particular sectors in the economy or particular regions in the economy, then the New Sentiment Index can be constructed for those using those specific characteristics. And so not only we can measure housing-related, housing-specific news sentiment, we can also do that for individual capital cities and regional areas based on samples of local newspapers. So that provides insights into the public perceptions and expectations regarding housing prices and market conditions. And so we did that for the capital cities in Australia. And we also have a national measure of housing sentiment index, but we also have capital city specific housing sentiment index.
Sweet.
Yeah. So would you like me to talk a little bit more about the results that we found? Or?
Yes. What was the result? Any correlation? And I guess specifically for some cities?
So first of all, we find that our housing news sentiment index tracks very closely with the other high frequency indicators of the housing market, such as the weekly auction clearance rate. Yeah. So the weekly auction clearance rates, those rates are very important and very timely indicators of the housing market. And so the fact that, the index tracks closely with that is a very positive news here, intended. And both of them, if you look at, our research paper, and then we also, I think, included a chart showing the housing activity and the housing news sentiment index, specifically during the COVID-19 pandemic. And both of them suggested a sharp decline in housing activity soon after the COVID-19 containment measures were put in place in Australia. So it was a very, very timely indicator of the downturn in housing activity. So that's the first finding. The second and also very important finding is that we find a local housing news sentiment index we find it to capture key fluctuations in local house prices for Sydney and Melbourne. So when we look at the house prices for Sydney and Melbourne, we find that local housing news sentiment tracks very closely and has very strong correlation with local house prices for Sydney and Melbourne. That said, based on our current estimates, the local housing news sentiment index are less correlated with housing price growth in other capital cities in Australia. So we were able to find that for Sydney and Melbourne, but not the other cities.
That is interesting. Have you found out why the reason? What the reasons could be for that non-correlation between that and smaller cities?
So every time we think about empirical exercise, we have to always remember that the analysis is only as good as the data. So if you have good data, then you can have good analysis. But when the data are insufficient or inadequate, then we cannot expect to be able to get much meaningful insights from the data. Now, Sydney and Melbourne's housing markets are more prominently covered in the media. due to the economic importance and the larger populations in Sydney and Melbourne as well. So that extensive coverage in the news results in a richer data set for sentiment analysis. And so that makes perfect sense that the sentiment index constructed for Sydney and Melbourne are more accurate and reflective of the actual market conditions in these cities. Right. So the same cannot be said for the smaller cities. So that is, I think, the most obvious and the most important reason of the unimportance of the unpredictable power of the sentiment index. Having said that, there's another aspect that we have to keep in mind. The market dynamics and economic factors can vary significantly between different housing markets. So it is entirely possible that home buyers in regions with very specific characteristics are less likely to rely on the news when making home purchase decisions or when setting or offering prices. A couple of potential things to be paying attention to is, for example, whether the regions have a diverse demographic. So, when you have diverse demographics, potentially you will have more variation in terms of the prices, but also in terms of the housing market conditions. And and those variation will be able to review, extra information about the market. And also that means that the new sentiment index will be able to exploit the variation for prediction. But if there is less diverse demographic, if there is less varying house prices, or if there is less speculative investment, then it is, it makes sense that, maybe buyers will not rely on news because it is all about trying to understand the condition, trying to understand the sentiment in the market. So if the market doesn't have a lot of speculative investors who basically bank on changes in sentiment to invest and to make capital gain on their investment, then it means that the news is not that important to them.
To them, right.
But Sydney and Melbourne, it makes perfect sense that Sydney and Melbourne will have many more speculative investors.
Right? Yes, that is, I believe, the most important two reasons for this. Because I was also thinking about these two aspects. Oh, that is perfect. That is perfect. Thank you for your analysis. Cool. Thank you, Sunny, for your introduction of the new sentiment. So basically, today we've learned so much more about this new index and the news uncertainty index as well. So basically, we've learned how to measure them in a very scientific way, and the relationship between this index with the economic activities, monetary policies, and the housing market. And when we talk about the housing, the new sentiment index with housing markets, we've learned that the new sentiment indices correlate with the Sydney and Melbourne's house prices fluctuations better. The reason for, I guess, the not so perfect correlation between the index with the smaller cities' prices could be because, one, the lack of data, and two, the types of property investors or property buyers in these smaller cities compared to the Sydney and Melbourne, the two largest cities. So before we finish, I just wanted to ask you, Sunny, if our audience is interested in learning more about your research, no matter the research papers or your recent studies at Moody's, how can they find you online, or how do they find your work online?
Thanks a lot for being interested in my body of works and for asking me about how to connect with me, John. So the easiest way to find me on the internet is to go to my LinkedIn profile and then just to search for Sunny K Nguyen. I think I will be able to give you the link that you can include, to the description
In
of
the show notes.
Yes. So, but easier is just, to go to LinkedIn and then just to search for Sunny K Nguyen. Maybe add in Sydney as a location in case there are so many Sunny K Nguyen out there. But if you can find a Sunny K Nguyen who is currently at Moody's and a PhD and an economist, that's very likely to be. That's very likely to be me. So I typically update about my professional activities there, including my latest research or my latest, articles and papers. So so looking forward to catching up with you guys. Anyone who's interested in my work, and anything related to economics in general on LinkedIn.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sunny. I'm pretty sure there will be so many people interested in that.
Thank you. And thanks again for, giving me this outlet, to talk about my works and to connect, with people who might be interested in the same topics.
Yes, it's our pleasure, especially pleasure to have you on this show. And thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely.
So that's another episode of the Property Nerds podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm Jung. I'll see you next time.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.
Game over.